Okay, we're ready to start. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here at 4:30 in the afternoon. Today, our guests will be Ms. Maleiha Malik, Executive Director of Protecting Education, Insecurity and Conflict Program from Education Above All Foundation, and UNICEF's Robert Jenkins, Global Director of Education and Adolescent Development. They will be briefing on the commemoration of the International Day to Protect Education from Attack. So, Mr. Jenkins, you want to start, please?
Sure. I guess I can be super brief and then look forward to any questions or comments in responding. But as we very clearly all mentioned, or was mentioned by a number of parties in the observance that just took place, obviously the trends are very worrying. We are asking for member states to adopt the Safe School Declaration, those who have not. Obviously implementation of such a declaration, is key, and many important concrete ideas were laid out in the last event, the event that just concluded. We're also requesting member states to lead by example and leverage their influence over parties and groups involved in conflict to ensure the highest standards of protection for students, teachers, and educational facilities. In the end, UNICEF, along with our partners and others, feel the absolute critical nature, many said, is for us all to work towards is to ensure education continues at the time of any disruption, let it be conflict or any other crisis. And I think we all heard and we're all recognize the importance of ensuring that children continue to learn during times of crisis.
Thank you, Ms. Malik. You have the floor.
I think you pushed it. You're good.
Yeah. Hi, I think it's probably worth contextualizing what EAA Foundation does, because unlike UNICEF, you may need to know a little bit about us. So EAA Foundation's 10 years old, 12 years old actually. It was established by our chairperson, who was just also presenting high-level remarks, Her Highness Sheikha Moza. And in fact, the program that I lead is called Protect Education, Security and Conflict. It predates the establishment of EAA. It's a pioneer in the protection of education from attack. EAA Foundation itself has, as Rob said, an absolute forensic focus on the provision of quality education to the hardest to reach children. So we set ourselves a really difficult task, which is those kids who are really difficult to reach for a number of barriers, one of which is the one we've been talking about today, which is a man-made barrier. It's not an earthquake like Morocco. It's a preventable barrier, which is conflict. And, those who are here in the UN know that the failure of global governance to deal with conflict through the key institutions, in the headquarters that we're sitting in, has meant that there's more conflict than ever that is causing disruption and death to the lives of children. So that's what the focus was today. But in addition to that, Education Above All has put nearly 15 million children, out-of-school children, hardest to reach children, through education in over 60 countries. And, partly what we've been celebrating at UNICEF this morning has been a decade of partnership with UNICEF to make sure that those 15 million children have opportunities. But I think today, the focus, and I think what we bring as unique to the situation, is a focus not only on any barrier to education. Today, what we're talking about is man-made barriers of conflict, which are preventable. So partly what the call has been today is about mobilization, not only at a global level, but for young people in the communities that they come from, where conflict is going on, to say enough is enough. And we realize that all conflict may not come to an end, but what we need to end is conflict and attacks on education in our own communities. And I think that call, that rallying call, is supplemented, and it reaches its pinnacle today with the announcement that you just heard, that working with our partners, we are not only committed to global advocacy today, we are committed to empowering the people themselves in conflict-affected communities to not only be victims, but be part of the solution to how we bring these conflicts to an end. So what we're going to be doing, and we're absolutely determined to do this along with our partners, is to work and reach out to young people like the ones you heard from today, like Victoria, like the teacher that you heard from Kenya, and to empower them to be able to take action to address what Rob is saying is a crisis in education. And what we want to focus on, in addition to what he said about provision of education, is the issue of accountability for who's causing that conflict and holding those people to account. We're available to answer more questions, but that's what the focus is of today. And what we want to really focus on is the hard-to-reach children. We want to make a commitment to empowering young people. And as a foundation, we have a global footprint, not only in primary education, but in reaching out to young people and providing them with opportunities in higher education and in employment. So I'd like to sort of open up the floor to answer any questions you might have. And we're also available, I think, afterwards to take any inquiries. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Yes, James, please.
James Bays from Al Jazeera. I'm afraid I wasn't able to hear all the event because I was at another event. But could you tell me, where are the worst cases? I mean, you talk, I think, about a 17% rise in 2022, unprecedented rise. Give us the sort of league table of the worst countries. And the second part of the question, do you see any, in the very, very busy schedule with the SDGs and everything else next week with world leaders here, do you see a forum where these issues may be discussed by global leaders next week?
Rob, do you want to?
I can look back. Do you have that list of the league?
Yeah, I've got a few of the countries that I can roll off the top of my head.
I'm happy to take this up.
I'm afraid I'm a geek where this is concerned, so if you don't mind me being geeky about it. So there are some persistent countries that come in that list. And I mean, you yourself were kind of, reporting from Afghanistan. Afghanistan was in that list persistently. And in Afghanistan, attacks on education, all sides, not only state actors, but also armed non-state actors, were prevalent. And I think what happened, particularly with the media, is that the attacks by armed non-state actors became more prominent, and it was hard sometimes to see that state parties were also, causing massive destruction. I mean, you reported on that for 20 years, so you can say that. Afghanistan stopped being in that top list, but the nature of disruption of education in Afghanistan has changed. So, that's been well covered as well, that the new barriers to education in Afghanistan are still challenging, but they're no longer on the league table of direct attacks on education, either by state parties or armed non-state actors. The other country that's persistently been at the top has been Colombia. It's been at the top both because of the FARC and other factions attacking schools or military occupation of schools, mining schools in the region, but also state occupation of schools. Colombia's going down in the league table now because there is, we hope there is a peace process, there is a disarmament process, and actually within the peace process, the negotiations, not attacking schools is being discussed. And one of the arguments we would make as a foundation is that when countries move from that situation, like Afghanistan or Colombia, moving to a complex peace process that's been negotiated, what we have argued a number of times is that not attacking schools and or having transitional justice where people make up for the fact that they've attacked schools should be part of those negotiations. The country that's also been really persistent that I think is a really worrying trend is the DRC. It's a large country with a youthful population with a very complex civil war that's taking place. There's and the emergence of kind of energy resources and potentially the development of the resources in DRC is likely going to make that situation much worse. We're very interested in what's happening there because there's huge amounts of recruitment of young children into armed groups from schools. There's military occupation of schools. Recently, I don't know if you followed it, but on the border between DRC and Rwanda, the school was actually burned down. it was a really hideous attack on a school in that region. We made a statement about that. So DRC's been very high. Those are sort of structural ongoing conflicts that are always up there. Then you've got conflicts which are there, they're low-level conflicts, and then they flare up. So, for example, Gaza, May 2020, 500 schools destroyed within a month. And actually, MC Abdul would have been there as a 13-year-old, when that happened. So I thought it was really moving. He performed this morning. The other countries that are there persistently are Cameroon, where the linguistic conflict between the parties means there's a constant state of either the schools being shut or worse, abduction of teachers. And then that, of course, has both a direct impact, the abduction of teachers or children, but it has an indirect impact because they're finding it impossible to recruit teachers, into the teaching profession. So actually, the long-term impact of attacks on schools is much wider than you actually notice from the figures. And my UNICEF colleagues have done outstanding work at making an argument that just as with healthcare, we have a better understanding when there's an attack on health of the full cost to a society, almost like an epidemiological analysis. We should do the same with education. It's not just the attack on education, it has indirect consequences in the long run. Yemen was always really high. There were some really high-profile attacks in Yemen, one of which was the attack on the bus and schools in Yemen. Has now been taken as litigation to the ICC by a UK lawyer. So those are the countries that kind of appear. And of course, you won't be surprised that I thought I'd end. Ukraine is, of course, now, very high on that list. And I think that if you analyse the figures, some of the trends, I think they'll be quite interesting for the media to know, and be really happy to share our analysis with you, is there's a tendency in the last 15 years for state parties to be much more willing to use high-impact explosive weapons in dense civilian areas. Syria is a really good example of that, the conflict in Syria. It's a willingness on the part of both state parties to be able to use really high-density explosive weapons that cause massive damage in high-populated. That's one of the major causes, I think, for fatalities. So those are some of the trends. I'd be really happy to share.
On the second question, I'm really optimistic, and UNICEF's optimistic about the importance education will receive next week during these many of the conversations. It's one of the high-impact initiatives to accelerate progress to the SDGs. I think building on the Transforming Education Summit of a year ago, now we're a year, there's a review taking place next week on what actions have been taken and what more can be done. So the sector overall, I think, will be very much featured in the conversations. I think the importance of continuing, as I mentioned earlier, learning at the time of crisis and including during conflict. You heard, well, if you were in the discussions, but basically that we have some great champions, including the state of Qatar, who's championing that message. And I think there is a consensus of the importance of ensuring every child continues to learn even at times of conflict. Then specifically on protecting education from attack, I think we're at the time of a critical mass when you look at the numbers of states that have signed, the statements that are coming out from top leaders. We have a consensus on the importance, a consensus of acknowledging the challenge. I think translating it into action now in these challenging countries, that's what we're hoping will be discussed next week also.
Can I just add one thing, which is that I think that next week there is nowadays a real focus on the environment, on environmental issues. And I think there is a connection, actually. So if you look at somewhere like the Sahel, or if you look at what's happening Mali, Niger, etc., you've got a downward spiral of conflict causing forced migration, causing changes in access to water supplies or nutrition, etc., which in itself is fueling further conflict and environmental degradation. So I think these global challenges, it seems like protection of education for attack is a really small part of it, but I think there's a link. And I hope next week what we can see is a much more complex approach where people don't think, okay, we are now moving on to the environment to challenge, to deal with that. And we see the interconnection, multi-sectorial solutions that are needed to deal with these problems of all the SDGs being approached together.
Maybe the last one sentence is, I think there is an absolute consensus and a focus on reaching marginalized children. The 244 million children currently out of school. That figure was raised numerous times in the last 2-3 hours. I think there is a consensus in this building and in the meetings next week on the importance of enabling children to catch up. And we actually just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of a partnership between Qatar and UNICEF doing just that, reaching marginalized children and bridging them back into school. And one of our main messages together was, we know what works. It's time to now enable additional partners to join us too, the state of Qatar and UNICEF and others, to indeed just that, reach all children with learning opportunities.
Thank you. Yes, Murad, please.
Thank you. Murad Hashim from Al Jazeera Arabic. My question regarding the initiative that announced today, that to provide a platform for young people from conflict zones to share their views regarding the protection of education. How this is gonna work? I mean, most of these places are hard to reach, and also how the UN and the foundation are gonna contribute on it.
I think that's probably one for me. So I think we're going to be working out the modalities of that. But we have had a really successful example of that. We have a partnership with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we convened a youth advisory board, and we had a global search. And we were really, really pleased because we got applicants, and we appointed an applicant from the DRC who leads a disability rights network in Africa. And, we're really active. We're in touch with him online, on email, etc. But it is really difficult to get him out. So last year I spent 2 months trying to get him a visa to come to the last commemoration in Paris. He would have been a stunning speaker, but he wasn't granted a Schengen visa. And I think we want to try and overcome those barriers. We want to find solutions to that. And what was really wonderful about that youth advisory board they convened last year was that, we had someone from Singapore, DRC, someone from Burkina Faso, someone from India, and just getting those young people together is wonderful. And it is really hard to reach people, but actually that is where modern technology does help. People are much more connected than you think. He's really active on social media. We get in touch with him on Zoom. He joined us on Zoom in Paris. So we'll reach those people. They're very hard to reach, but we're determined to reach them. But it's of getting them together in a global search. That's what the next challenge is, and that's what we'll work with our partners.
And I think it's fair to say it's part of a broader effort of the United Nations system, including UNICEF and others, to engage more directly with youth. We saw it in the event just now, and I think that's something we're all very much committed to.
We were also able to work with UNICEF's Adolescent team. We were able to get testimonies of young people in their networks from Ukraine, etc. They're on the microsite in the exhibition outside, in case you want to see them. So I think there are ways. Absolutely. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other question?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So
Thanks a lot.
I'd like to thank our speakers, Mr. Jenkins and Ms. Malik. Thank you.